I never thought I'd have to stand in my own front yard, staring down a woman who was so convinced of her own authority that she refused to acknowledge reality itself. But there she was, eyes sharp with entitlement, lips curled in a self-righteous sneer, as she waved a clipboard in my face and declared that I was in serious violation of her community's rules. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so utterly insane, because this estate, had been in my family for nearly 100 years. Every tree, every fence post, every brick in my house was a part of my legacy. And now, a stranger who had just moved into the adjacent neighborhood a few months ago was standing on my property, acting as if she owned it. That was the moment I realized what kind of battle I was about to face. Not just against an HOA, but against a Karen who simply refused to accept the truth. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve. Subscribe for more crazy stories like this. It had started like any other morning. The sun was barely peeking over the treetops. The air was crisp with the scent of pine, and the distant hum of the city was nothing more than a murmur on the horizon. I took a deep breath, enjoying the peaceful solitude of my 50-acre estate, a land that had been passed down for generations in my family. It was my sanctuary, my escape from the relentless noise of modern life. But peace, as I was about to learn, was temporary, because the moment I stepped out onto my porch, I saw her, a woman, power walking down my long gravel driveway like she owned the place. She was dressed in expensive athletic wear, her blonde bob bouncing with every determined step. Clutched in her hands was a clipboard, and she was glaring at me like I had personally offended her existence. "Excuse me," she called out, breathless but full of authority. This is unacceptable." I raised an eyebrow, glancing behind me as if she was talking to someone else. But no, her glare was fixed squarely on me. "Can I help you?" I asked, already feeling the first twinges of irritation crawl up my spine. She marched up, jabbing a manicured finger toward the wildflower patches that grew along my driveway. "I'm Karen Thompson, president of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association," she announced, as if that title held any weight here. "And we need to have a serious discussion about your noncompliance." "Noncompliance?" I echoed, already knowing this conversation was about to go off the rails. "Yes," she snapped, tapping aggressively at her clipboard. "Your lawn is wildly overgrown. Those trees haven't been properly trimmed, and this entire property is bringing down the aesthetic of our community." I blinked at her. "Lady, I'm not part of your HOA." Her face twisted, like she couldn't comprehend the words I had just spoken. "That's not how it works," she scoffed. "All properties within the Maplewood Heights district are subject to HOA regulations." I let out a sharp breath, barely restraining my irritation. "This isn't Maplewood Heights. My property predates your entire development by nearly a century." Karen's expression darkened, her grip tightening on her clipboard. "That's ridiculous. I can literally see your house from my backyard, and that doesn't mean you own it." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. She wasn't used to being told no. That much was obvious. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, flipping through her clipboard and holding up a printed map. "See this?" she said, as if presenting evidence in court. "Your estate falls within our boundary lines." I glanced at the paper. It was a development map, one that had been redrawn to conveniently absorb my land into their district. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was intentional. They were trying to forcibly claim my estate as part of their community. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. "You and I both know that map means nothing. My property is privately owned and registered separately from your HOA's jurisdiction. So I suggest you turn around and walk back to whatever perfectly manicured lawn you crawled out of." Karen's nostrils flared. "You're being very difficult," she seethed. "I'm giving you a chance to correct these violations before we escalate this further." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Escalate? Are you serious?" Her lips curled into a smirk. "I am serious. If you refuse to comply, The HOA has the right to take legal action. That was it. I'd had enough. You know what? Call the cops. Call a lawyer. Hell, call your entire HOA board and have them march down here. I don't care, but you will get off my land. For the first time, Karen hesitated. It was only for a second, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't expecting pushback. She wasn't expecting someone who actually knew their rights. Then, just as quickly, she composed herself and let out a sharp breath. Fine, if that's how you want to play it. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. I'll be reporting this immediately. I crossed my arms, watching as she huffed and turned on her heel, marching back toward the road. But I knew this wasn't over. People like her never just walked away. And I was right, because less than 20 minutes later, a police car rolled up my driveway. The moment I saw the police car roll up my driveway, I let out a slow breath, already preparing myself for the nonsense that was about to unfold. Sure enough, as the patrol car came to a stop, Karen's smug face appeared from behind it, arms crossed, her clipboard still clutched like a holy decree. She had really gone through with it. She had actually called the cops, convinced that she had the authority to enforce HOA rules on land that wasn't even hers. The officer who stepped out was a familiar face, Mike Hansen, a guy I had known for years. He had dealt with plenty of ridiculous calls in his time, and from the tired look in his eyes, he already knew this was going to be one of them. "Afternoon, Jack," Mike greeted as he approached, giving me a knowing look before glancing at Karen. "Got a call about some property dispute." Before I could even open my mouth, Karen stormed forward, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Officer, this man is refusing to comply with the Homeowners Association regulations. His property is a disgrace to our community, and he is in clear violation of our standards. I have informed him of the necessary changes, but he is refusing to cooperate." Mike blinked at her, then turned to me. I simply shrugged. I already told her I'm not part of her HOA. My land is privately owned, and it's been that way for generations. Karen scoffed, flipping open her clipboard and shoving a map toward Mike. "As you can see, our community lines clearly encompass his estate. That makes him subject to HOA guidelines." Mike took the paper, gave it a quick glance, then sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, I hate to break it to you, but HOA regulations only apply to properties that are part of the association. This land isn't. Jack's property has existed long before your development, and legally, you don't have any authority over it." Karen's face went from smug to shocked to furious in the span of 3 seconds. That's ridiculous. I can see his house from my backyard. It's literally right there." Mike let out a long-suffering sigh. "That doesn't change anything. You can see the moon from your backyard, but that doesn't mean you own it." For a moment, I thought she was going to combust right there on my driveway. Her face turned red, her mouth opened and closed, and her hands clutched the clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, with a dramatic huff, she straightened up and lifted her chin. "Fine," she snapped. "If you won't enforce the rules, I'll take this to the county office. There must be some local ordinances against property neglect." I almost laughed. "Neglect? My property is worth 10 times more than any of your cookie-cutter houses. It's maintained just fine." Karen glared at me like I had personally insulted her existence. Without another word, she spun on her heel, storming back toward her car. Mike shook his head, muttering something under his breath as he watched her go. "I'll say this, Jack. You've got yourself a determined one. Good luck for the next few days. I hope that was the end of it." But people like Karen never knew when to quit. It started with small things. Passive-aggressive notes left in my mailbox, and signed but filled with HOA jargon about community standards and maintaining a respectable image. I ignored them, tossing them straight into the trash where they belonged. Then came the surveillance. I started noticing her SUV driving past my property at odd hours, slowing down near my fence line. the glare of her phone screen reflecting off her window as she took pictures of my land. Once, I even caught her stopped at the end of my driveway, blatantly aiming her camera at my house. That was the final straw. I strode down the driveway, my patience running thin. "Karen," I called, my voice sharp enough to make her jump. She quickly lowered her phone, trying to play innocent. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I was just admiring the view. With your camera?" I crossed my arms, my gaze cold. She forced a smile, though her eyes gleamed with challenge. "As HOA president, it's my duty to document ongoing community issues." I let out a slow breath, reining in my temper. "We've been over this. You have no authority here. I'm not part of your HOA. I don't want another note in my mailbox. I don't want to see your car lingering around my property, and I definitely don't want to catch you taking pictures of my land again. If this keeps up, I will involve the authorities. Do you understand?" Her expression barely faltered. If anything, the glint in her eyes darkened. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Carter?" I shook my head. "No, Karen. I'm setting a boundary. Respect it." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back toward my house. I could feel her glare burning into my back, but I didn't care. I hoped that was the end of it. I should have known better. A few days later, I was in my workshop, fixing up one of the old fences on the property, when I heard the sound of unfamiliar voices outside. Frowning, I set down my tools and stepped out onto the porch, only to find a group of men in uniform walking around my front yard, jotting down notes and taking measurements. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "Can I help you?" One of the men, an older guy with a clipboard, turned to me. "Good afternoon, sir. We're from the county assessor's office. We're here to conduct a property evaluation." My frown deepened. I wasn't notified of any evaluation. The man glanced at his clipboard. "We received a complaint about potential code violations and unpermitted structures. We're here to investigate and reassess the property value if necessary." My blood ran cold. I didn't even have to ask who had filed the complaint. I already knew. Karen had escalated things to the county. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "All right," I said evenly. "Who exactly filed this complaint?" The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, sir, but I can assure you this is all standard procedure." I clenched my jaw, my patience hanging by a thread. "Well, I can assure you that there are no code violations or unpermitted structures on my property. If you need documentation, I have every permit and inspection report filed properly." The lead inspector looked relieved. "That would be very helpful, Mr. Carter." I led them inside, retrieving the thick folder of paperwork that detailed every legal aspect of my estate. We spent the next hour going over every document. By the time we were done, the lead inspector shook his head. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the inconvenience. Everything here is in order. Frankly, your property is one of the best maintained I've seen in years." I nodded, barely suppressing my frustration. "Appreciate it. Now, while I understand you can't tell me who filed the complaint, can you at least tell me if it came from someone in Maplewood Heights?" The inspector hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I can't say more than that, but yes." I let out a slow breath. I had given Karen a chance to walk away. I had set my boundaries, and she had ignored them. She wanted a fight. Fine, she was about to get one. The moment I realized Karen wasn't going to stop, I knew I had to prepare for the worst. People like her didn't just back down when faced with logic, facts, or even legal documentation. No, she was the type to escalate, to push and push until she got what she wanted, even if it meant breaking the law to do it. And sure enough, she did. It started early one Saturday morning. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery outside, the low rumble of engines, and the sharp clatter of tools. That immediate jolt of panic hit my chest, the kind you feel when you just know something is wrong before you even see it. I threw on a jacket, stormed out the front door, and what I saw made my blood boil. A full landscaping crew was on my property, right near the main entrance, ripping out my carefully maintained hedges, trimming my trees without permission, and even unloading materials like they planned to install something. There were at least half a dozen workers, all moving efficiently like they had done this 100 times before. They didn't even look up when I approached, because to them, this was just another job. I forced myself to keep my voice level as I approached the man who seemed to be in charge, a middle-aged guy in a company-branded jacket holding a clipboard. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my patience already threadbare. The man barely glanced up, looking more annoyed at being interrupted than anything else. "Morning, sir. We're just carrying out the landscaping orders as per the HOA's request. Shouldn't take more than a few hours." He said it so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like he wasn't actively trespassing on my land. My jaw tightened. "What HOA?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The guy gave me an odd look. "Maplewood Heights," he said. "Mrs. Thompson put in the request." Said the homeowner finally agreed to comply. My fists clenched at my sides. I didn't agree to anything. For the first time, the foreman looked uncertain, glancing down at his clipboard and then back at me. "That's not what we were told." He hesitated, flipping through the papers in his hands. "We have work orders signed by the HOA. The property was listed as under their jurisdiction." I let out a sharp breath, barely keeping my temper in check. "It's not. I have the legal documents to prove it, and you and your crew are trespassing." I turned, already pulling my phone from my pocket. "So, unless you want to explain to the police why you're destroying private property without permission, I suggest you pack up and leave." The foreman paled. He was a hired worker, not some HOA enforcer, and the last thing he wanted was legal trouble. He turned to his crew and started waving his arms. All right, pack it up. We're leaving." The workers hesitated, but when they saw the look on my face, they didn't argue. Within minutes, they were loading up their tools, pulling out of my driveway one by one. And then, right on cue, she arrived. Karen's white SUV pulled up to my gate. And the second she stepped out, I saw that triumphant smirk plastered across her face. "Ah, Mr. Carter," she called, like we were old friends. "I see the improvements are coming along nicely." She had the audacity to act like this was some normal, prearranged project. I took a step forward, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. "Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing?" She blinked, feigning innocence. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I'm simply helping you bring your property up to community standards. You should be thanking me, really." I laughed, short and humorless. "You sent a landscaping crew onto my land, without my consent, based on a forged document." Karen's expression didn't change, but I saw the brief flicker of something in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. "I have the paperwork," she said, pulling a thick folder from her oversized handbag. "It clearly states that your property is under HOA jurisdiction." She shoved it toward me, like I was supposed to just accept it as gospel. I yanked it from her hands, flipping through the pages, and my stomach twisted. These weren't just fabricated claims. These were altered property records, official-looking documents that had been doctored to make it appear as though my land had somehow been absorbed into Maplewood Heights. I looked back up at Karen, my hands shaking from sheer rage. "This is fraud," I said, my voice low and deadly. "You forged legal documents." Karen smirked. "Prove it." That was it. That was the moment I realized she actually thought she could get away with it, that she had gone so deep into this delusion of control that she believed no one would question her. But she had underestimated me. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and pressed it to my ear without breaking eye contact. "Yes, I need to report trespassing and an attempted property fraud in progress." Karen's face went pale. "Wait, what?" she started, but I held up a hand. "You and your crew are not leaving," I said, my voice deadly calm. You're going to wait right here until the police arrive. The next hour was a blur. 2 patrol cars arrived first, followed by a detective who specialized in property crimes. The officers took statements, examined the documents, and the longer they looked, the worse Karen's situation became. The detective took one glance at the forged paperwork and shook his head. "This is bad," he muttered. Karen was frantically trying to argue her way out of it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the more she spoke, the more tangled in her own lies she became. And then, finally, the moment I had been waiting for. One of the officers turned to her, pulled out his handcuffs, and said the words I would never forget. "Mrs. Thompson, you're under arrest for trespassing, attempted fraud, and falsifying legal documents." Karen's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "Wait, no, you can't. This is my community. I was just enforcing the rules." She twisted, looking for support, but there was none. The workers she had hired had already given their statements. The police had all the evidence they needed, and as they placed her in the back of the patrol car, she was still ranting about community standards and property values. I watched as they drove her away, my heart pounding, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen might have been arrested, but the entire Maplewood Heights HOA had backed her on this, which meant I had a bigger fight ahead, a legal war, and I was more than ready to finish it. The day Karen was taken away in handcuffs should have been the end of it, but I knew better. People like her didn't just fade quietly into the background after getting caught. They fought, clawed, and screamed their way through whatever consequences they faced, convinced that they were the victims, convinced that they were above the rules. And sure enough, even from behind bars, Karen wasn't done. The very next morning, I got a call from my lawyer, Sandra Martinez, who had been keeping a close eye on the situation since the property fraud attempt. Her voice was sharp, professional, but there was an undertone of irritation that told me she wasn't calling with good news. "Ethan, the Maplewood Heights HOA just filed a counterclaim," she said, barely hiding her exasperation. "They're trying to distance themselves from Karen, claiming she acted alone. And now they're arguing that they had valid concerns about your property and were simply acting in the best interest of the community." I let out a sharp breath, rubbing my temples. "So, what? They're trying to make it seem like they were just being responsible neighbors." Sandra sighed. "More like they're trying to weasel out of liability. They know Karen's case is going to be a disaster, so now they're shifting the blame entirely on her while also attempting to justify their actions. They want to avoid any legal repercussions for the board as a whole." I clenched my jaw, anger simmering under my skin. It wasn't enough for them to let Karen run wild, harassing me, trespassing, and committing fraud. They wanted to wipe their hands clean of it now that things had gone south. "Let's not give them the chance," I said. "We go after them, full force." Sandra chuckled, a sharp, approving sound. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. I've already started gathering complaints from other residents in Maplewood Heights. Turns out, Karen wasn't just overstepping with you. She's been pulling the same power-hungry nonsense on plenty of homeowners for years, issuing ridiculous fines, threatening legal action over minor infractions, even bullying elderly residents into making unnecessary changes to their homes. That didn't surprise me in the slightest. Karen had that special kind of entitlement that didn't appear overnight. It had been nurtured, fed by years of unchecked authority. And now, it was all coming back to bite her. But it wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about an entire HOA board that had turned a blind eye while she stomped all over people's rights. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Over the next few weeks, things escalated quickly. My lawsuit against Karen and the HOA gained traction, and before long, it became a very public affair. Local news outlets picked up the story, "Homeowner battles HOA tyranny," painting me as the independent landowner standing up against corrupt neighborhood politics. And the more people learned about what Karen and her board had done, the more support I received. Other residents from Maplewood Heights started coming forward, eager to share their own horror stories. One couple had been fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong shade of blue on their front door. Another resident, an elderly veteran, had been harassed for months because he refused to remove an American flag from his front porch. But the worst case? An older couple, both in their 70s, had nearly lost their home because Karen had been issuing fines while the husband was undergoing chemotherapy, knowing full well they couldn't afford to fight back. That was the final nail in the coffin. Sandra used those testimonies to build an airtight case, proving that Karen's actions weren't just about me. They were part of a long, calculated abuse of power. And finally, after months of legal battles, depositions, and mounting public pressure, the HOA board had no choice but to fold. The court not only ruled in my favor, awarding damages for the trespassing and fraudulent property claim, but they also ordered a full restructuring of the HOA. Karen was permanently banned from holding any leadership position in any community organization. And as for the rest of the board, they were forced to resign. An independent auditor was brought in to oversee Maplewood Heights, ensuring that any new leadership followed strict guidelines that prevented abuse of power. It was a complete dismantling of everything Karen had built, and she could do nothing but watch as it all crumbled around her. On the day the final ruling was issued, I stood outside the courthouse, watching as Karen, now out on bail but still awaiting sentencing for fraud charges, stormed past reporters, her face tight with barely contained fury. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, but I saw the way her fists clenched, the way her jaw tensed. She had lost, completely, utterly, and undeniably, and she hated it. But as she disappeared into the crowd, I realized I didn't care. I had won, and more importantly, I had set a precedent. No one else in Maplewood Heights, or anywhere else, would have to deal with her kind of unchecked authority again. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. Tom, one of the homeowners from Maplewood Heights who had testified in the case, showed up at my front gate, a hesitant smile on his face. "Hey, Ethan," he said, scratching the back of his head. I know we never really talked much before all this, but I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to her, for standing up for all of us." I shook his hand, offering a small smile. "You don't owe me any thanks, Tom. I was just protecting what was mine." Tom chuckled. "Yeah, well, a lot of us wish we had done the same a long time ago." He hesitated for a second, then took a deep breath. "Look, we're having a community meeting next weekend. A real one, not one of those awful HOA dictatorship meetings. We'd love it if you came. Not as a member, obviously, but as a neighbor." That caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, I had never expected an invitation. But looking at Tom, at the genuine relief in his eyes, I realized that what had started as a personal battle had ended up changing an entire community. And maybe, just maybe, I had gained some real neighbors in the process. "I'll think about it," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. That weekend, as I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my land, the same land my family had worked so hard to protect, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. No more HOA threats, no more entitled demands, no more Karen. Just the quiet hum of nature, the rustle of the trees, and the knowledge that no matter how hard they had tried, they couldn't take what was mine. I had won, and I would never let anyone forget it.